within the material world, and any sincere student of transcendental knowledge must accept the words and statements of Brahmaji as infallible. The Vedic knowledge is infallible because it comes down directly from the Supreme Lord onto the heart of Brahma. And since he is the most perfect living being, Brahmaji is always correct to the letter. And this is because Lord Brahma is a great devotee of the Lord, who has earnestly accepted the lotus feet of the Lord as the supreme truth. In the Brahma Samhita, which is compiled by Brahmaji, he repeats the aphorism, Govindam Adipurusham Tamham Bhajami. I am the worshipper of the original personality of Godhead, Govinda, the Paramable Lord. So whatever he says, whatever he thinks, and whatever he does normally in his mood are to be accepted as truth because of his direct and very intimate connection with Govinda, the Paramable Lord, Sri Govinda, who pleasingly accepts the loving transcendental service of his devotees, giving all protection to the words and actions of his devotees. The Lord declares in the Bhagavad Gita 9.31, Kuntiya Padijanahi, O son of Kunti, please declare it. The Lord asked Arjuna to declare, and why? Because sometimes the declaration of Govinda himself may seem contradictory to mundane creatures, but the mundaner will never find any contradiction in the words of the Lord's devotee. The devotees are especially protected by the Lord, so that they may remain infallible. Therefore, the process of devotional service always begins in the service of the Lord, who appears in the cyclic succession. The devotees are always liberated, but that does not mean that they are impersonal. The Lord is a person eternally, and the devotee of the Lord is also a person eternally. Because the devotee has his sense organs even at the liberated stage, he is therefore a person always. And because the devotee's service is accepted by the Lord in full reciprocation, the Lord is also a person in its complete spiritual embodiment. The devotee's senses, being engaged in the service of the Lord, never go astray under the attraction of false material enjoyment. The plans of the devotee never go in vain, and all this is due to the faithful attachment of the devotee for the service of the Lord. This is the standard of perfection and liberation. Anyone, beginning from Brahmaji down to the human being, is at once put on the path of liberation simply by his attachment in great earnestness for the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna, the Paramable Lord. The Lord affirms this in the Bhagavad Gita 14.26. Mam chayo vabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate saguna samati tedyan grama bhuyaya kalpate. Anyone, therefore, who is earnestly serious in heart and soul about being in intimate touch with his personality of Godhead, in a relationship of transcendental loving service, will always be infallible in words and action. The reason is that the Supreme Lord is the absolute truth, and anything earnestly dovetailed with the absolute truth attains the same transcendental quality. On the other hand, any amount of mental speculation on the strength of material science and knowledge, without any bona fide touch with the absolute truth, is sure to be a mundane untruth and failure, simply due to not being in touch with the absolute truth. Such godless, unfaithful words and actions, however materially enriched, are never to be trusted. That is the purport for this important verse. A grain of devotion is more valuable than tons of faithlessness. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Gyanatimidantasya Gyanajana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilatam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Upakadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagvijatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vidham Tam Sajivam Sadvetam Savatutam Parjana Setam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karanav Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpade Gopesha Gopika Kanta Ayada Kanta Namosude Tapta Kanchana Goyangi Radhe Vrindavaneshari Rishabhanu Sudhe Devi Pranamami Haripriya Vancha Kalpata Rubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhayavacha Patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadaya Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So today, in today's verse, Lord Brahma is describing to Narada Muni the characteristics of a devotee once they surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in this particular verse, Lord Brahma is making 3 statements and a conclusion. So the first 3 lines of the verse, they're statements made by Brahmaji onto Narada Muni. And at the last line, he makes a conclusion. So in the first line, Lord Brahma says, Na bharati me namasho balakshate. So in this particular line, na means never, bharati means statements, and me means mine. Then he's addressing Lord Narada Muni, saying that misho balakshate. Misho balakshate means that his words never prove to be false, never prove to be untruth. So from the first line, we can understand that Lord Brahma is telling Narada Muni that my statements are never untrue. The second line, he says, Na ve kvachin me manaso meshagadihi. He says, Na ve kvachin. Na means never, ve means certainly, and then kvachin means at any time. So he has given triple confirmation. Then he says, Me manaso meshagati. So me means my, misha means mind. So he said that my mind is never misha. Misha means untruth. So from the second statement, we can understand that he says that my mind is never untrue. Then he goes to the third line, the third statement. There he says, Na me hishikani patant asat pate. There he says, Na me, which is nor mine, hishikani. Hishikani means senses. Patanti means degrades, and asatpate means intemporary matter. So from that we can understand that Brahma is saying that my hishikani, my senses, they never deteriorate. So after giving all these 3 statements, at the final line he gives the final conclusion. The final conclusion is Yan me hridor kantyavatat duto hari. So he says Yan me is because mine. So this is basically summarizing all the 3 statements that he has made. His statements are never untrue. His mind is never untrue. His senses never deteriorate because hridor kantyavata duto hari. Hridor means heart, and Ot kantyavata means by great earnestness. So he's describing explaining to Narada Muni that because his heart is with great earnestness, earnestness is catching hold to the Supreme Personality Godhead's lotus feet. So that from that verse we can understand that the conclusion is because I have caught hold of the Lord's lotus feet. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says that this verse is one of the most important verses because it explains to us why, what the characteristics of a devotee actually are. So the first statement that Narada Muni makes is his statements are never untrue. So with non-devotees, when they speak the untruth, they say a lie bluntly and then they forget about it. However, with devotees, what they do is that what they say is always truth. Because if they're connected to the absolute truth, how can they speak untruth? That's the main point that is being raised in the purport. If I am a devotee, how can I speak untruth when I'm connected with the absolute truth? Because the devotees are connected with the absolute truth, what they say is never untrue. We can see in many scenarios where non-devotees, they often say untruth because they don't have that connection established with the Supreme Lord. An example of this, we can look at Bhagavad Gita, for example. I think in the Macmillan version in the 1960s, Srila Prabhupada wrote the introduction. And there he was saying that in the first paragraph, he says that in previous editions of the Bhagavad Gita, what happened is that I was listening to a few classes as well, and there it was being said that over the last 2 centuries, from 1960, the past 2 centuries, there were 600 versions of the Bhagavad Gita. 600 versions. And out of all those 600 versions, not one person could become a devotee. The reason is because those 600 versions, even though they were Bhagavad Gita, they were mundane interpretations on what the Bhagavad Gita actually was. So it was their own they weren't connected to what Lord Krishna actually said. It was their own mundane interpretation. So because of that, it wasn't authorized. And because it wasn't authorized, because of their mundane interpretation, it wasn't true. However, Srila Prabhupada, when he wrote the Bhagavad Gita, he completely disregarded all of his, whatever interpretations that are there, and he just presented Bhagavad Gita as it is, because he's connected to Krishna directly through the parampara. Because he is connected, whatever he says is to be considered true. Compared with all the other editions of Bhagavad Gita, they're not so true, because they don't have that established connection with Srila Prabhupada and with the parampara. And we can also see in history as well, not history, but throughout all of Krishna's pastimes, that the unflinching devotee, once that unflinching devotee is connected to Krishna, what he says never proves to be untrue. Lord Brahma, because Lord Brahma is connected to Lord Krishna, he is Adipati, Adikavirya, he's the father of all, he's the creator of all the material universes. But what he says is never proven to be infallible, because he has dedicated his life unto the Supreme Lord. Once we dedicate our lives to the Supreme Lord, then what actually happens is that whatever we do, Lord Krishna makes that successful. It doesn't prove to be untrue or to be a failure. It is always true. An example of this is where this is affirmed is in Bhagavad Gita 8.7. In that verse, Krishna is saying to Arjuna that therefore Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna, and at the same time carry a prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me, in your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you attain me without doubt. So from this we can understand the most important part of this verse is the second line. With your activities dedicated to me, and your mind and intelligence fixed on me. So as devotees, we have to dedicate everything to the Supreme Lord. We have to fix our mind and intelligence on Him. And we'll go into a bit more detail later on how this actually plays off. And in Bhagavad Gita 9.3, he also says that this is a very famous verse that is actually quoted in the purport. O son of Kunti, declare boldly that my devotee never perishes. So even in the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that Krishna is telling Arjuna, he doesn't make the affirmation by himself. He says, Arjuna, you declare that my devotee never perishes. Because Krishna is always there to protect the devotee, and therefore that devotee can never fail. If Krishna is with that person, then no one can fail. No matter what they say, their statements will never prove to be false. So an example of this is in the Puranas, we see Mahabharata. Many of you might be familiar with the Mahabharata. On the 13th day, Abhimanyu was stuck in the Chakravyuh, and he was killed by half a dozen or even more warriors. So when Arjuna, after the whole battle, after the day of the battle, when he returned and found out that Abhimanyu had been killed in this way, when he started asking more questions, he found out that there was one particular person called Jayadratha. Now Jayadratha, what he did is that he blocked all the Pandavas from entering this military formation, this Chakravyuh, by standing in front of that path and stopping any Pandavas from entering the Chakravyuh to protect Abhimanyu. And there's a whole long story on how he could actually manage to stop the Pandavas. That's a story that we'll keep for later. But he was able to stop all the Pandavas, except for Arjuna. So when Arjuna actually found this out, he became very angry. And because normally in Kshatriya customs, previously in the battle, what would happen is that one warrior would be attacked by so many warriors. But at that time, there was always a chance of another person coming and protecting him, coming and saving him. But however, what Jayadratha did is completely blocked the line between Abhimanyu and all the other Pandavas. Because of that, Arjuna became very angry, and he actually made a vow at that moment, saying that by sunset, either Jayadratha would die or he would enter the fire. So he made that very, very bold vow, and as soon as he said that by sunset tomorrow, either I die or Jayadratha would die, the whole Pandavas started celebrating. And on the other hand, there were the Kaurava party who was celebrating because they have just killed Abhimanyu. But they hear all the celebrations going by, and they are wondering what is going on. Like, they had killed one of the most strongest warriors of the Pandavas, but the Pandavas are still celebrating. And then at that moment, Jayadratha runs in, and then he tells all the Kauravas, Yodhana, Dronacharya, he tells them that exactly what has happened from his own spies, from what he's heard, that Arjuna has made a vow to kill him within 24 hours. So when they heard this, Dronacharya actually made a whole unbelievable array of a battle formation. It was completely unbelievable. In the Mahabharata, the description of this array it's amazing. Like there's 4 military formations, and it is just said that if you were to be in front of that formation, it would be at least 20 miles wide. 20 miles is like 30 kilometers wide, and double that distance deep. So that's around 62 kilometers. So that's really, really big. So once Dronacharya actually made that arrangement and everything, and once Arjuna also calmed down, then Krishna went up to Arjuna. And Krishna, he spoke very softly, but he scolded him at the same time. He said very heavily, he said, "Without consulting me, how could you make such a bold decision to kill Jayadratha within 24 hours? How could he make such a bold decision?" He said that from spies, I have just heard that Dronacharya is making a whole military array just to protect Jayadratha. You can imagine, I mean, if you have to come across 20 miles by 40 miles of military soldiers, that's a very difficult task to approach. But Arjuna replies very coolly. He says, "With you at my side, my success is certain. With you at my side, my success is certain." You can imagine, I mean, Dronacharya has just made this whole plan to dedicate all of his resources to stop me from reaching a goal. And still he's saying that because Krishna is at his side, he will be successful. What he said will not prove to be false. And Krishna, as Krishna is, he has to protect the words of his devotee. So eventually, Mahabharata actually is described that there was not one moment when Arjuna was fighting that he actually stopped fighting. I mean, he would slow down, but he never actually stopped. He kept fighting. And even after killing one whole Akshuni of soldiers, that's a measurement in Mahabharata, after killing that many soldiers, he still wasn't able to reach Jayadratha. There are a few minutes left till sunrise. And there are a lot of different interpretations of this. Some people say that Krishna did it with his Sudarshan Chakra. Some people say he covered it with his illusory energy. But whatever happened is that when there were just a few minutes left, then Krishna covered the sun. And naturally, the Kauravas started celebrating. Like, Arjuna was a huge burden on their path to gaining the kingdom. He was really, really strong. So once they realized that Arjuna will now die, then as people normally do when they win, they decide to talk a bit too much. So what Jayadratha did is that of course he was relieved, he was really happy. So he came out of all that protection, went straight to Arjuna and started mocking him. He said, "Oh, look, you've made a vow to kill me within 24 hours. Now you have to die." So he was now in front of Arjuna, and at that minute, Krishna removes the Sudarshan Chakra, and Arjuna kills him instantly. So from this, we can understand that because Arjuna was actually connected with Krishna, what he said never actually happened to be untrue. There are many, many more examples. For example, the Ramayana, for example, there's the example that when Angad goes to Lanka, Ravana's kingdom, what he does is that he places his foot onto the palace, and he makes a very bold statement. He says that if any one of you can remove my foot out of the ground, then I will accept that you'll be able to defeat all of Ram's army. Everyone you can defeat if you can lift my foot. You can imagine Angad is just a teenager. To put my foot down, I'm pretty sure anyone can lift my foot. But he puts his foot down and says that if any one of you can lift my foot up, then that means you can defeat Lord Ram's army. And not one person could lift up Angad's foot. You can imagine. I mean, he's just a 16-year-old boy. Not a 16-year-old boy, but he's basically a teenager. And to have all these powerful warriors trying to lift up his foot, but can't even lift up his foot, that just shows how the Lord actually protects the statements of his devotee. So from this we can understand that the first statement of Lord Brahma, that what he says never proves to be true. The second statement that Lord Brahma makes, we're running a little bit short of time, so I'll speed through this a little bit faster. Second statement is that the mind is never untrue. 15 minutes. The mind is never untrue. So with devotees, what they do is that they're not able to control their mind. And because they're not able to control their mind, they constantly remain unsteady. However, devotees, what they do is that they're able to subdue their minds. And because their mind is subdued, their mind is like the best friend. So in Bhagavad Gita 6.6, Krishna says to Arjuna that for him who has conquered his mind, the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. So we can understand that a disturbed mind cannot understand the absolute truth. We have to control that mind. So Lord Brahma's mind was controlled. Because his mind was controlled and he was steadied, it was like his best friend rather than an enemy, he was able to maintain that connection with Lord Krishna. What we actually see is that when a person has an uncontrolled mind, two things start to happen. First thing that happens is that he starts to procrastinate. Procrastinate means that he leaves things for later. Second thing that he does is that they will have so many excuses to do anything except what they need to do. They can blame the whole world, they can make so many excuses except for themselves. Devotees, however, they have a more controlled mind. What they do is, contrary to what an uncontrolled mind does, they don't leave things to the last minute, and because they understand that time is running really, really short. Like Lord Brahma, we can see that Lord Brahma has such a long lifespan. I'm not very good at the numbers. I think 311 trillion, 40 billion, something like that. So it's really, really long. And for him, our lifespans are like a blink of the eye. Like 100 years, we think it's such a long time, but it's just a blink of an eye. We really don't have that much time. So devotees understand this. And the second thing is that they're very proactive. They don't make up excuses. So we go to the first point, procrastination. So when people procrastinate, what they do is that you can just see a lot of laziness in the attitude. For example, if there was a piece of paper in the center here, within 1 minute I can go pick up that piece of paper and then return to where I'm sitting, and then do what I need to do. However, what people do when they procrastinate, they say, no, you do it, I don't want to do it. And like that, what happens is that time just keeps going and going and going. And like that, many seconds are just wasted just by that. So a devotee doesn't want to waste time. And there's a very famous saying that is, procrastination is the thief of time. The very famous saying, procrastination is a thief of time. This is actually a really, really good... it's very relevant to what we are saying right now, because when a thief steals something, when he robs a big bank, what the government or the police do is that they immediately just lock him up in a prison. They lock him up in prison so that he doesn't do the same thing again, that he's not able to do the same thing. Similarly, as devotees, we have to actually lock up this procrastination so that time is not wasted. Rather than money being wasted, time is not wasted, because time is more valuable than money. So we have to lock up procrastination so that this doesn't actually happen. And onto the second point, when people make excuses, as I said, they can blame the whole world except for them. And I was listening to a lecture by His Holiness Mahavishnu Goswami Maharaj, and he gave a very nice example. He said that when you are sailing, when the wind goes to a certain direction, then you have to adjust that sail to that particular direction so that you can actually move. But if you miss that wind, then you cannot blame that situation, or the wind wasn't there the whole time, or whatever. When the time was right, you didn't make that move. When the time was right, you didn't make that move. So this was a very nice example that he actually made, that as devotees, we shouldn't be making so many excuses, making so many blames. When the time is right, we have to take the opportunity to progress further in Krishna consciousness and make that connection, rather than just blaming it on the situation itself. I remember an example that my Guru Maharaj gave just yesterday, actually. He gave an example a while ago, how when in the 1970s he was in the Underground Rail. In London they have the Tube Rail, the Underground Rail. And there on the wall he saw that there was this big advertisement. And that advertisement, there was no follow-up or anything. All there was a sunrise. On the sunrise there was a huge rock in the middle. And around that huge rock there was a lot of shaggy rocks and everything. And there was just one line, one sentence that was in the middle of the rock. And that said, you only see obstacles when you lose sight of the goal. Very nice point. The sunrise is there. There's a lot of rocks. You can maintain your vision on the sunrise, but if you stop focusing on the sunrise, then you see all these rocks, all these sharp rocks and everything. So this example really, really struck in me because it made me realize that excuses are like obstacles in our path of bhakti. They're literally like obstacles. When we make excuses, we're just hindering our progress to go further. But if we maintain our sight, to maintain that connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, if we try to maintain that connection, then no matter what obstacles there are, we won't care an inch for it. The third statement that has been made is his senses never deteriorates. Lord Brahma is saying that his senses, they never deteriorate. So with non-devotees, it is very easy to become entangled in material affairs. And it's very easy for them to be entangled because their senses, even though they're youthful, they're not deteriorated, they still have the capacity to be entangled. Like we see a lot of of the youth who are non-devotees, what they do is that their senses, they're top-notch. I mean, they can see well, they can smell well, they can hear well. All their senses are really good. But they don't, when they do material work, what they do is that they actually become more entangled in it. With devotees, however, one important point is that as devotees, we don't renounce all of our work, but at the same time, we still do the material work without being entangled. This is a very important point. We are able to do material work, the same work that a non-devotee does, we do the same work. Like, for example, I'm a student. In my class, for example, there are a lot of non-devotees doing the same thing as me. They're studying. But what they're doing and what I'm doing, it's different because I'm not able to become entangled. The reason I'm not entangled is because that connection with the Supreme Lord is still intact. Even though we are devotees, we still have to do material work instead of renouncing it entirely. But instead of becoming attached to the results, we have to focus on our actual duty to serve Krishna and maintain that connection instead of being entangled. In Bhagavad Gita 5.10, Krishna says to Arjuna that one who performs his duty without attachment, surrendering all of the results onto the Supreme Lord, is unaffected by simple action, as a lotus leaf is untouched by water. So the second point is very, very important. A person is unaffected by spiritual action if he doesn't do his duty by attachment, just like a lotus leaf isn't touched by the water. So there's a lotus, but the lotus never actually comes in contact with the water. The leaves don't come in contact with the water because they are still in connection with the main source, the main stem. So as devotees, we have to maintain that connection. Once we actually keep that connection with the Supreme Lord, then we will start to realize that anything can be done for the service of Krishna. We can use anything for the service of Krishna. And devotees don't see excuses, but they see how they can serve Krishna through their current position. We cannot reject any material work. I'm not saying stop study, stop working. But once we dedicate everything to Krishna, then everything becomes spiritualized. There is an example of a devotee that I personally look up to quite a lot. His Holiness Bhakti-tirtha Maharaj. Many of you might have heard of him. He was one of the #1 book distributors of his time. But what I did is that I did a bit of research into his biography. And when he was in his high school years, he was academically top-notch. He was really high in high school. Then, because of that, he was given a scholarship to go into Hawkins School, which is a very prestigious school. It's a preparatory college. So before you go into university, you prepare. So he was doing philosophy and political sciences. Then he was also a leader of Martin Luther King Jr.'s movement. He also had 2 degrees, one in psychology, one in African American studies. But out of all these qualifications, like he had a long list of academic qualifications, the main important thing is that he actually had a gift of interacting and making spontaneous friendships with many celebrities. Like there are many examples of those celebrities who Bhakti-tirtha Maharaj has been a mentor, has been a friend with, like Muhammad Ali, Nelson Mandela, all these big celebrities. Bhakti Maharaj, because he has education in political sciences, he knows African American studies, knows psychology, he actually was able to make that interaction. And he was giving a class in this very big gathering. Even now, if you go into YouTube and you type Bhakti Swami, it's a very famous class. The first link that comes up is this class. It's like only a 4-minute video. And if you fast forward to 2 minutes, there he says a very, very nice point. He says that once he was in Nairobi, they have a very small temple, they have a gurukul and everything. And a minister for the government came. And he asked Swamiji, what do you have to offer? So all the devotees, they were saying, oh, we have a Food for Life program, we're helping the poor, we have schools, we have all these big projects around the world. But then Maharaj said he wanted to go straight to the point. So he said, let me take you on a small walk. So Maharaj took this minister all around the temple, and he was walking, and they went past the Gurukul. And he said, this girl is from Italy, this boy is from Spain, this person is from South Africa, this person is from America. And then he looked at this minister, and he said, you tell me one place in Nairobi where you can see this kind of variegatedness and people are working together. One place in Nairobi. And at that time, Nairobi was facing a lot of racial problems, And he said that you tell me one place in Nairobi where you can see this kind of variations. And this minister easily understood his point, that to understand, because all the racial problems, they're all in Nairobi at that time. And the minister it was very easy for the minister to understand what Bhakti Maharaj was referring to. Because of all the racial problems in his own country, ISKCON actually has so much to offer. So, of course, what some devotees may do in this example is that they won't like to approach this racial whole mess. The main reason is because, people do say that we don't want to become embodied, we don't want to look at a person based on the embodied status. But as devotees, we don't do that. At the same time, it is still important that we are educated in that, because when in the future, when we come across a certain situation, we have to know what is going on so that we can actually solve that issue. And we can help link people into Krishna consciousness. And the one personal example from my Guru Maharaj, a couple of years ago, not a few years ago, I went to pick up Guru Maharaj from the airport, His Holiness Janananda Goswami Maharaj. And what I did is that I picked Maharaj up from the airport, and then I started missing days regularly off school, So he came, I think it was a Tuesday in February, he came, and I skipped school, and it was a morning flight, so I skipped school, I came to pick him up. And like this, he had many programs in Sydney. He had the temple programs, home programs, hall programs, because the schedule was also very busy. So I would make an effort to not go to school. I would, to keep the day off school. And I remember the last day of his visit, he looks at me and he says, Kesh. That time, because he would just call me Kesh. He says, Kesh, tomorrow what are you going to do? I said, Mahasham, I'm going to skip school. He looks at me and he says, why are you going to skip school? And I was like, 10, 11 years old. I was like, I don't know, Maharaj. And he said, Maharaj has a gift when it comes to interacting with children, especially me. He speaks very softly. Like he's strict, but it's not like overly strict. He speaks very softly, you can understand. And he says, he told me, you shouldn't skip school, it is very important. Don't skip school because of me and this and that. So from that, I actually understood when I was maybe 10, 11 years old, that what I'm doing is not right. Because I know personally, as a child, when you're a child, like 10, 11 years old, your main goal is to, please your elders, please your parents, please everyone else. And I've got 1 minute left, so I'll try and summarize everything. But as a child, your main goal is to please everyone. So when I figured out that Guru Maharaj actually wasn't pleased with my attitude, then what I did, then I stopped school. And then, didn't stop school, I stopped skipping school. So because of that was actually from Maharaj's own mouth. His personal instruction to me was don't skip school. So in conclusion, to wrap everything up, all these three statements that Lord Brahma has made, he's untrue, he's always truthful, his mind is true, and his senses never deteriorates. This is only possible because he's actually surrendered onto Krishna. He has that connection with Krishna. Simply by following Lord Brahma's example of connecting with Krishna, we can help stop some of the world's biggest problems. Like in the world currently, there are so many problems. Like people are lying, people are because they are still after sense gratification. There's so many problems. Like the number of things people can do to get sense gratification is unbelievable. They can do anything to get sense gratification, and there's so many issues. So all these issues can be stopped if we just stop the cause of these big problems, which is sense gratification. So we just have to follow Lord Brahma's mood. And Lord Brahma's mood, as given in the purport for this verse, is Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami. He says repeatedly, I am the worshipper of the original Supreme Personality of Godhead, Govinda, the Palm of the Lord. Once we actually establish this connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then we can actually notice that the world will become a better place, obviously. Not only that, but our mood also changes. We will stop being dishonest. Our senses, we are able to control our senses, and there's no sense gratification. So on that note, I'll conclude. Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada ki, Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Shri Shivada Govardhana Jagannath Subhada Gauranatai ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Srila Gurudeva ki, Nitya Gaura Premanande.